so now that we've added some subdivisions to our object and we've manipulated those subdivisions, let's see if we can add even more subdivisions. So your first instinct might be to go back to where we added the first set of subdivisions, and if I click all these and try to add subdivisions now, well, we'll see something strange happens. And this is really this polycube algorithm, this subdivision algorithm, really trying to get back to the original shape of this cube when I add the subdivisions. So it really doesn't understand what I've done here. I'm just undoing there, right? It doesn't understand all of these changes I've made to the mesh. So really and truly, this method of adding subdivisions is really something you do before you start to sculpt or move around vertices or edges, and afterwards we need to find other ways to add divisions to this surface. So let's say if I wanted to continue smoothing out this surface by adding more and more divisions, I could do that by using the multi-cut tool, which is under mesh tools in my modeling menu, mesh tools, multi-cut tool. Alright, and this allows me to cut into my mesh, cut divisions in a number of ways. Right, I'll just show you a few right now. I can just click from edge to edge. Let's say if I want to put a loop through all of these faces here, I can click from edge to edge and then finish it off there. I can press enter to finish. Alright, that takes me back into my tool, and I can start clicking here. I can click around here, here, right? I can even right click to finish and then start clicking again. I can click to a point and snap to a point like that. So pretty quickly I can add a lot of divisions, right? I'm just going to undo what I did there, right? If I just wanted to add a loop though, right, there's a shortcut, there's an easier way. If I just press and hold control, right, it gives me the option to put a loop anywhere along this row of edges, anywhere through this row of edges that I am hovering over here, right? If I hover over this one here, it's going to give me a line through this row of edges here, right? So I could go in and put one there and left click, put one there, right? What we'll notice, right, when I've added this loop here is that it is trying to follow the flow or the topology of these edges to the top here. So you see how it's kind of going in a kind of wave. It's really kind of following. It's kind of averaging between this bottom one here, which is flat, this loop here, which is flat, and these top ones, which are kind of undulating. So it's giving us a kind of even average in between those. Right, so I'm just going to undo those loops. But there may be a case where you wanted to just put something straight across, right? You just want to cut straight across, and I can do that with this same tool. If I go into my front view here and frame it, right? If I want to cut straight across there, I could just click and drag a line out, and if I press shift, that line is going to be perfectly straight, and if I release, I get a straight line across the object. Right, I can do the same thing down here, release, and I get a straight line, a straight cut, right, through those faces. Right, so it really depends what kind of shape you're trying to make. I could even cut diagonally, right, through this object. Although you don't really want to be arbitrarily cutting, right, across your object like that, because when we're doing polygon modeling or box modeling, in essence this is what we're doing right now, adding divisions. This is starting from a cube and adding more and more divisions, getting more complex, right? This is called box modeling. We really want to keep our faces, right? Our faces, we want to keep them four-sided, like this one here, right? So by cutting across the surface like that, I've ended up with faces that have 3 sides, triangles, and I have a face here with more than 4 sides. This one actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides, so we just want to be careful that we don't end up with that kind of geometry, and we'll see more, right, why we don't want that kind of geometry later on. But basically, right, when we're adding divisions to an object, if I wanted to make this thing perfectly smooth and round, right, I could just keep on, in theory, adding divisions, adding edge loops, and with the multicut tool, right, and just selecting and scaling and, you know, one by one trying to smooth out the surface. But that would not be very efficient. It would be very difficult, very time consuming, and it wouldn't make sense, because there is in fact an easier way to smooth this object, since Maya has its own subdivision smoothing option, right? So if I'm just going for a smooth spherical shape, right, I can simply press 3 on the keyboard with this object selected, and we see that my object is perfectly smooth. And if I press 1, right, I go back to the base mesh, right, which is what Maya used to get the smooth object, right? So when I press 3, it shows me the subdivision smooth version of my base mesh. Right, so I, in fact, if I want a smooth surface, right, that looks like this, right, I don't really need to add any more divisions. Right, I can just smooth my object like this right now. And this, what we have to keep in mind though, that when we go to render, right, this will only render with mental ray smooth like this. It won't render with Maya software, but we'll get into that later on. But when you're rendering, you're probably going to be using mental ray, not necessarily Maya software. But if you do use Maya software, you need to keep in mind that if you render a subdivision object, it won't look like this in Maya software. It would look like this. So basically, right, just to talk a little more about subdivision surfaces. The subdivision surface is really a representation of what the base mesh looks like when the Maya mesh smooth algorithm is applied. Now, what is that mesh smooth I'm talking about? Well, if I duplicate this object here and move it across, I can go to mesh smooth. Let me just check my options. I think by default it is exponential, and if I click smooth, I can in fact increase these divisions here. If I increase it to 2, right, that is in fact, if I press 3 on this one, right, it's more or less the same in terms of the detail that I'm seeing, right, with these two objects. In fact, if I select this subdivision preview here, and I go into the attribute editor, right, under P-Cube Shape 1, I believe under Smooth Mesh, under Subdivision Levels, if I check Display Subdivisions, and I go into Shading, Wireframe Unshaded, right, we can see that the number of divisions here correlates to what is being represented here, more or less. Right? So it's something that's good to know. Right? So as I mentioned before, right, if I turn off that display, if we were to render this in the regular software render, right, which I think it might be defaulting to now, right, the render that I'm getting for this one on the left is the base mesh. But if I was to render it with mental ray, right, I would get something more similar to the one on the right. So if you're rendering with Maya software, right, if you want your object to look like this, then you're going to have to actually apply the mesh smooth. Alright.